How is camp going? Are we having fun? Awesome. Okay. I am going to start off with a question. When was the last time God unexpectedly provided for you? I feel like we don't stop and think about that enough. So for me, something more recently, a little more hard-hitting, it started in December of last year. So I was falling into a very stressful and dark time in my life. Just the pressures of junior year was really getting to me more than normal. I didn't understand why I dealt with stress, even like regular emotions, the way that I did. I didn't understand the way that I processed my emotions. So at the beginning of the year, when I was still majorly struggling, I started going to a counselor to talk about it. During one of those counseling sessions, I was diagnosed fairly early on with OCD. So if you don't already know, OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, which basically is when I have a constant unreasonable thought and fear that leads to compulsive behaviors. So I learned it's not technically curable, I guess, but it is treatable, so you can reduce the symptoms. So with a chronic disorder, you could call it, I've been becoming more and more aware of how stressful everyday life is for me. And it's probably the most frustrating thing that I've ever been through. It was scary to see how, like, I've acted all my life through the lens of a doctor. When I've always thought that this is just what everyone did. I thought this is how everyone reacted to stress and things like that. So this is when I started praying and praying for God to take this away from me. I didn't understand why I've always functioned the way that I did, and how it's so different from everyone else. I didn't understand why I've always been like that. Aside from my two best friends, I didn't have much support during this too, just because everything with junior year, a lot had happened. There's a lot of drama at school, so I had my best friends, Tavin and Sarah. Let me see where I am. Yeah, so I didn't have much of a support group. So while all this was happening, maybe even a little bit before, I'm still kind of fuzzy on the timeline, my family and I had gotten an invitation. It was to the 25th anniversary of Grace Chapel. So if you don't already know, I grew up at GC along with my brothers, but we left around when COVID happened. But they were really active in the youth group, so I grew up going to all the youth nights, ultimate youth nights, stuff like that. So this invitation had me really nervous, just because I hadn't seen y'all in a long time, but we still decided to go, just because why not, you know? We really felt like we needed to. And then after seeing everyone again, I immediately felt back at home. I remember crying when I got back in the car, telling my mom, like, this is where we're supposed to be. This feels like I'm back at home. I'm, like, so upset. I was beside myself. You can ask Miss Ann. Just because how much I missed it. But little did I know that that gut feeling about coming back would be the Holy Spirit working to provide exactly what I needed during this time. Going through this season of essentially having to break down my mental wiring and trying to put it back together in a way that isn't in an OCD way, this was my unexpected provision that God gave me. So God provided for me exactly what I needed at the right time, the most encouraging support system that I could ask for that made me feel less alone during such what would be a lonely time if I didn't have y'all, and I couldn't be more grateful. So I did ask a friend of mine her response to the question of what's God's unexpected provision for you, while I was preparing this message, and this is what she shared with me. And also, I'll be like a lot reading from this because I don't want to overshare anything that I previously know of her story that she didn't want me to share here. So let me find that. Okay, so it's a long story, but you'll have to bear with me. So my friend, she grew up in a very abusive home with an alcoholic father. When she was about 7, her parents had gotten divorced, and her brother just went with her mom. They grew up then with a single mom. This was very difficult on her, as you can guess. Let me see where I am. Oh yeah, there was not a lot of parental guidance or supervision, which had her like around the wrong crowds when she got a little bit older, when she was a teenager, after moving around like a ton. So from being around the wrong crowds, not the right influence, not godly influence, at 19, she got pregnant. So towards the end of her pregnancy, she moved in back with her dad, which was a very abusive situation. So after she had her son, when he was 11 days old, she got kicked out of her dad's house over a stupid argument. So along with this, too, her son's dad said that he didn't want to be involved or responsible pretty much in any way for him. so leaving her now a single mom and to survive off of $196 from the state every month and $200 off of food stamps. So let me see. Oh yeah. From there, she spent the next about year with her baby, homeless, living either in her car or in friends' houses, or in most cases, strangers, where she'd stay for long periods of time. Whoever would take her, if there was a couch, she'd be there. So throughout that year, God had provided places for her to move or to stay. She would move at least probably 10 times from place to place with her son within that year. At one point in that year, she didn't know where she was going to go next. She didn't have a next game plan, no strangers to talk to, no family, friends, nothing. So she was driving around. She was absolutely distraught, she told me, sobbing. She didn't know where she was going to go. She had her son in the back seat. But she drove past a sign outside of a business that said, "Be still and know that I am God." So at this moment, she felt God's peace and knew that he would provide for her. And this is when she wasn't even a Christian. So she grew up, I think she went to church 2 or 3 times when she was younger because her mom would try and get her dad to go, so then they'd all go. But she didn't really have a personal relationship with him. She would pray to him in like times of worry and stuff like that, but she didn't have a personal relationship. So this was like her starting point of like, wow, I need to be all in here. So yeah, she believed in God and knew that he was there. She would pray a lot, but she wouldn't have that personal relationship. So after she had her son, she had started to seek God more, which is great. So one of the places God provided for her to stay was a pastor's house. She stayed with them for a couple of months, and during that time, she started reading and studying the Word on her own time. And mind you, this couple was, I think, 4 years older than her, so it was a really big deal that they were like taking her in. After reading the scriptures about baptism, she felt really compelled to be baptized, but she still didn't really understand why it was so important. So they went out to the pier in St. Pete Beach, Florida, and she got baptized, even though when she was talking to the pastor about it, he said it was more like you can do it if you want, but there's not really any spiritual significance, which is not true. But even though the pastor told her that, she still felt it was important to her salvation, even though she didn't really understand why yet. So at some point after this, her son's dad came back into the picture. Timeline was fuzzy, but we think that they got back together at some point around that time. And then he said that his church wanted her to visit. They wanted to meet her. So she did. She started going on a weekly basis to Northwest Church of Christ down in St. Pete, and she met a girl named Tula. Tula invited her into her home every day to study the Word and give her lunch. So my mom would take, it is my mom, by the way. I didn't mention that. My mom and my big brother Tommy, she would take them in pretty much every day from morning to afternoon period, and then provide a lunch and then study the Word. So after this, after studying the Bible more, she learned the real reason and significance of baptism and was baptized in their church for a second time when she actually understood the significance. So during that time, that church welcomed her in as a family member immediately. And she would often find cash in her Bible placed by other churchgoers. So when she didn't have money for diapers and something like that, she would always open her Bible and she'd find some whenever it just perfectly happened for her. So one day a man from church had jury duty in the city of Tampa, which is 30 minutes away. So he came across an auction for cars on his way there and back, remembering how her car was about to die. And that was a pretty vital thing for her, that she needed a car at least. He then got with a few brothers from that church and raised the money for it so that they could go and bid on it. So the auction was for $1,500. They bid on it, and it was $1,501 that they got it. So they got the car. And then, so she had a lot of friends at church, including the jury duty guy, who is my dad, by the way, which is not surprising. All of you know Alec. And then the baby in the story is my big brother, Tommy. So from then, they had that friendship already. They were already in the same, big friend group, and they were all, my mom was 20, I think so. And then from there, they got married a year later, and then had my 2 older brothers, Tanner and Jacob, who I love so much. And then, this is just a story of how God provided for her from an abusive home life with her dad and everything to where she is now. He provided not just her physical needs for survival, but more importantly, her spiritual needs. Another redemption story of how God provides, similar to my mom's story in some ways, is Ruth, which is where we're about to turn to. So if y'all could turn to Ruth, that would be great. I will give y'all a minute. I need one too. Okay, so the book of Ruth is only 4 chapters, so we are going to go through it, not breaking down verse by verse, but we're just going to go through all of it, pretty much. So, okay, verse 1. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed, that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. Also, I'm reading from NASB, so if it's a different version than y'all, just bear with me. So yeah, that's kind of about to like introduce the characters. So the name of the man was Elimelech. Yes. And the name of his wife Naomi. And then they had 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And so they're like very important in the story. So let's see. As the story goes on, Naomi's husband dies, so leaving Naomi by herself dependent on her 2 sons. Well, if we keep going down to verse, I think, 4. I think so, yes. Where now her 2 sons had also passed. So that leaves Naomi, Ruth, and then Orpah, which is the other daughter-in-law. So they lived there for about 10 years, it says. So since the 2 sons had died and the father, they were pretty much left with nothing. At that time, culturally, women were not going to be making enough money to support a family. They would probably be like stuck begging for money, for food, for anything that they could get. So in verse 6, let me see. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, and she might return into the land of Moab, and for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people, giving them food. So this, obviously, if they're left with no support system, they're going to go where they hear of provision. So this is where Naomi suggests to her daughter-in-laws to leave in hopes of a better life. So she told them to go back to Moab, where they were from, and to remarry, like have a stable life, pretty much, because she wouldn't have been able to have that. And then when we keep going down, Orpah, she's crying, she's leaving. And then Ruth says, where is it? Yeah, it says in verse 14, Ruth clung to her. So pretty much at that point, they realized that Ruth was not going anywhere, and she said in verse 16, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and for where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. So this was crazy of Ruth to do, because she's pretty much sentencing herself to a life of poverty, like nothing to support them. She just wanted to go with Naomi, though. She wasn't going to leave her. So we go down. It says in verse 18, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. She said, okay, fine, let's go. So they both, in verse 19, so they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? Because you have to remember, they had left. They went to Moab, which was also a huge thing you are not supposed to do. You're not supposed to go and leave to another country. So it was surprising that she came back, and people just acted bitter towards her. And so, yeah, she returned with her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And then they basically came to Bethlehem, and then at the beginning of the barley harvest, which is very key to remember. So now in chapter 2, this is when we introduce Boaz. So Boaz was a very wealthy man. He owned a lot of crops, so he was well off for sure. So in verse 2 and 3, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she was basically going to pick up the scraps of what she could so that she could eat that day. That's what the gleaning is. So in verse 8, God's plan is further carried by Boaz, creating provision for food and for Ruth and for Naomi. So Boaz ended up happened to be the field that she was gleaning in. in verse 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids." So he's basically saying, don't go anywhere else. You are more than welcome here. Just stay here. And then in verse 12, 1 minute. Verse 12. May the Lord reward your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. So that is pretty much exactly what Ruth and Naomi were doing. They had to trust in God's provision in time. And yeah, go to Bethlehem. That was the only source of food. That's the only way that they were going to continue living. Where is it? Oh yeah, and then verse 15. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servant, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves, and do not insult her." He was basically saying, okay, make sure she's protected. Don't touch her. Don't do anything. Pretty much just let her take whatever she needs. So that was a crazy God thing at that time. Especially when they would have been shunned also, because since they went to Moab and then came back, there was but they wouldn't have been very kind to them. And then verse 18 and 19, Naomi questions Ruth about where she got the food. She's just like, okay, so where's all this, suddenly you're just bringing bags of food. Where is this coming from? Where is it? 18 and 19. Yeah. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw that she had gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. Her mother-in-law then said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The name of the man who I worked with today is Boaz." And then, as Naomi was talking with Ruth, it was revealed that, Boaz is actually a close relative from Ruth's deceased husband's side. So, and this was a big deal because at that time, both of the sons had passed, the dad had passed. Normally, the women would go and have to marry someone to redeem them, to basically, keep them afloat. So, the fact that Boaz was a relative, she happened to be in Boaz's field, that was okay, so he's, in line to be a redeemer for them, to marry her and then provide for them. So, in chapter 3, after finding out that all this had happened, and how they were related in some ways, Ruth goes and lays down at Boaz's feet after her mother-in-law told her to. So I have to say, this was culturally significant at that time, because when you're laying at someone's feet, there's a sense of being very humble. There's a sense of humility there. So she lays at his feet, because if someone did this now, we'd probably be really weirded out. But in ancient Israelite culture, this was a request from Ruth to Boaz to humbly ask for protection and provision. So she had to be able to put herself in a very vulnerable spot to trust him with this, so that her and Naomi would be provided for. So down in verse 9, where am I? Yes. Introduced herself as a maid, requesting for Boaz to spread his covering over her, which would have been essentially asking him to be a source of provision, and implied a proposal of marriage as well. So if he were to cover her with his blanket, that would pretty much him be saying he was going to accept it. So he ended up doing that. So he responds by saying that there is a closer relative, but that relative ends up choosing, or if that relative chooses not to redeem her, then he had no problem with doing that. So this is also interesting to see because God provided two potential sources of security. So she had the one redeemer, and then we had Boaz, who either way they were going to have a source of food. So he invited her to stay the night, just stay at his feet, and then before she left in the morning, it says in verse 15 that he gave her 6 measures of barley, which to bring home to the city, which is equivalent to about 60 to 75 pounds of barley back to the city. So this was crazy. And then in verse 17, she said, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Now this wording is very specific and very important. So if you turn back to Ruth 1, verse 21, so in this verse it said, "Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed." If you go to 1:21, Naomi is talking. She said, "I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" This just shows how God does provide. She There was such a point in time where she didn't have anything. She was empty-handed. But after all this happened, where Ruth had two different redeemers, either way, they had food supply, they had a place to stay, God did not leave her empty-handed. So that is very important. And then what am I? Yeah, so this is just significant because it just shows God's provision in time. So down in chapter 4, the first about 7 verses of chapter 4 is dialogue between Boaz and the possible other redeemer. So a part of being a redeemer is taking that land and keeping it. And so the other redeemer said, I can't do that. I don't have enough money to keep it sustained, so you just go ahead, you marry Ruth. So that is what he did. So Boaz and Ruth get married, and then in verse 13 of chapter 4, Ruth gets pregnant, and she has Obed, who is the father of Jesse, who is the father of David, who generations later has Jesus. So this just shows God's provision for us. All this happened, it all leads down to us in how we're provided with a Savior. There's no way we could have salvation without it. So here. Now I'm going here. So yeah. These are both stories of God's provision and his redemption. He used humans and their spiritual gifts to provide exactly what they needed at the right time. Both women came in from the outside, from my mom having to find God the hard way, or from Ruth being a Moabitess, later being redeemed, and part of God's plan for the ultimate redemption, which is Jesus. So both were provided for in very unexpected ways. I don't think either of them were expecting everything to turn out perfectly how they want it to, because there was no reason that they should have. So how can this apply to us today? So now if everyone could turn to Matthew chapter 6, and then we'll start in verse 26. So Matthew 6:26, and then we'll go to verse 31. 6. Give everyone a minute. Okay. So Matthew 6:26, look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And who of you, being worried, can add a single hour to his life? And why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grasses of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow, is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, you little of faith? Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear for clothing? So this is pretty much saying, okay, if God is going to provide for birds, it says it right there, how much more will he provide for you? A human who has a soul, who he loves, who he sent his son to come and die for. If God sustains a bird's life, then yeah, someone that he loves and made in his perfect image, he's going to provide for you. So God uses Boaz as a vessel to be a provider and a redeemer to Ruth, and you could even say the same about my dad with something as simple as a car to a single mom. God gives us those same spiritual gifts, and in our case, everything we physically need and even want. So obviously I'm not ignorant to the fact that we're a very blessed community. We normally are not worrying about how we're going to get our next meal. I don't want to assume, but that's just kind of around where we live. But even more importantly, God provides what we need spiritually. So even everything I could say everything happening with my mom, how she needed that physical provision, it was even more important the entire time to be provided for spiritually, because that's what really matters. So, hold on, where is it? Yeah, God gives us those same spiritual gifts, in our case, everything that we need. It could be that you are naturally compassionate more so than others, or you're outgoing to include other people, or you have a work ethic that shines more behind the scenes. Regardless of which specific gift God has provided for you, how can we show our appreciation and gratitude with those gifts? So would it be to keep it to yourself and not use them? No, it would not be. That wouldn't make any sense. Now we show our gratitude by letting God use you as a vessel for his Spirit to impact other people, to help provide for someone else the way that he's provided for us. So we should use our unique and special and specific gifts that we all have to help bring God's love back to other people, to be that unexpected provision of encouragement or support for someone else. just like my dad was for my mom, how Boaz was for Ruth. And the even cooler thing about this is we don't need to rely on those gifts alone. So even though we have certain attributes that make us fit for certain roles and things that make us us, that doesn't mean it's our only source. We have God that is our central and sustaining and only provider who gives us those gifts in the first place, and we need to remember that. So God is enough because he is our provider. That's the message today. He is enough because he is our life source and he is always constant. So I want to leave you with this, Romans 8:28. So if anyone could turn to that, that would be great. It's 8:28. Okay. And we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Everyone is called to his purpose. We're all called. We have certain gifts that we can use. I guarantee you every single person in this room has something, if not more than one thing, to use. 100%. In a second, we're going to go into a reflection time. So during this time, feel free to journal, pray, sing along. I know I probably will be. I have to turn off my mic. You can stand up or praise God in any way that you feel necessary. Don't feel obligated to just sit still, or unless you want to. Then I'll come back up to pray. So this song is a great reminder that God is enough to provide, even just by the name Jireh. It is so good because it essentially sings out scripture, specifically what I just talked about in Matthew 6. So yeah, take this time in any way necessary that you need to.